Is this thing on? Is this bitch recording? Hi, hello. Welcome to my crazy corner of the internet that is my channel. Yeah, my name is Gammy. This is probably the most personal video I'm going to be making about my life. I mean, there's probably going to be more, but so far, this is the one. And this is going to be quite a different video regarding, well, what goes on in my life, what I document, what things what I put out there. And in general, this is going to be partially my personal story when it comes to like my worldview, what I believe, what I think is going on with the state of the world, any of that relation. So, oh, Hazel turned around, so she doesn't want to be a part of this. So, to start things off, way back when I was born into a Seventh-day Adventist family. My parents are ex-Catholics. They converted within their childhood. So I don't know how much of a red flag that should be, because if you can be coerced into religion since you're a child, then that pretty much goes to show that religious indoctrination is working, and that's pretty dangerous. So, what is my case like? Well, like I said, I was born into a Seventh-day Adventist family, and we were relatively fundamentalist. Yes, we were. And the biggest issues that we had were just how conservative things were, how typical of a lifestyle that it was. And there's something about Seventh-day Adventists is that they generally try to live the highest class that they can possible. Most of the time what they do is that they do choose careers that pay them relatively well, or at least there is enough community in some churches to where they can receive enough meals within a week to be assisting more than regularly. But in general, my family was relatively well off, even during the recession. The recession was tough for everybody, but little by little, since we were immigrants going into the United States, our lives slowly tried to getting better and better. And that led to me and my sister being raised in a Seventh-day Adventist school. And during those times, I would just say that I felt very different from the rest of the people. I felt like I wanted to say, whether it was a witty comeback, whether it was something, completely out of pocket for some people to hear. I love shock value, and I think you can kind of tell that if you speak Spanish and listen to my comedy. But in general, I didn't question much of my lifestyle because it was very much ingrained into it. And for me personally, it was very much rhetorical, and I didn't think of it much because I thought that's just how life is. And that's kind of sad for somebody who is, that young, but I feel like somebody of this day and age who is around, let's say 6 to 12 years old, they are much more conscious of what is going on in the rest of the world and are able to even speak out on such said issues like genocide and wars that shouldn't be happening. So slowly, little by little, I did start to see the cracks. But here's a big incident. When I was 12 years old, I was diagnosed with ADHD. And that pretty much opened up a lot of... it didn't open up a lot of opportunities. It just made me... It made me a little bit more secure in the person I was in the moment. Not fully, because at the time I was actually being homeschooled. I was being bullied in the small school of 25 kids, and I was still being bullied, so my parents pulled me out. I was homeschooled for a few years, and then we moved from that small town later down to southern Tennessee. So, oh dear, very, very loud streets I live on. Anyway, so when I moved later to Collegedale, Tennessee, if that sounds very familiar to the Seventh-day Adventist community, It should. It's the land of little Debbies and a horrible police force and a lot of snooty people that live pretty miserable lives, at least compared to what I live, I would say. And I I slowly started to, know a little bit more of the world. One of the biggest factors that led to me slowly deconstructing is music. And I guess from a very young age of 8, I started, playing piano. I started playing trumpet at around 10 years old. I learned a little bit from my dad, and then slowly I started learning other instruments until I settled on French horn. And during those times, I was also trying to break out of what was just the classical music, just the, liturgical style of music that you just listen to in church. And to me, the aspect of music is one of the most devious ways I would say that people in the church would try to manipulate someone's life, is by sheltering them according to the taste in music. And something really interesting when it comes to music is that this is where some people, I guess, would start seeing the crack show in religion. And I'm not going to quote Bible verses. I'm not going to be doing a lot of research into this video. This is just a lot of personal things that comes off of my tongue. But I personally believe that if you start to study on the history of music and how music started out, you're going to start seeing the connections of what people would call spirits, demons, how music would also work as a medicine for people, even in ancient times. And with that, you start to notice how important music has been culturally, and how superstitious even cultures have been to music. And slowly after that, you start to educate yourself on things like the Satanic Panic and what is with, all of the bands and their aesthetics, and why do they like to be socially rebellious. And that slowly I started to slowly be attracted to that mindset. And I never really put it close together with what was with what was the Satanic Panic and music, and the music world, and the whole devil and whatever that the Christians tried to put into your brain about things that just are not true about musicians. But the other thing you start to notice is that the biggest contradictions would be right there in the Bible, when it would say to praise the Lord with whatever their equivalent of drums were, to knowing what kind of music existed pre-Gregorian chant period. And to put it really simply, it would be very interesting to tell somebody that pretty much what sounded like a pagan seance was also what sounded like a praise song to God from the Israelites. Or let's say Yahweh, even in those times, because that's another part that comes way later in my deconstruction journey, is the amount of gods that are referenced in the Bible, because I barely studied what was the Bible. What I mostly had integrated into my brain when it came to church was I enjoyed the music, and I ironically went more to liturgical churches instead of like the new, evangelical, hand in the air, tongue speaking churches, which I was later exposed to. And we're going to get into that later as well. So far, what is going on? So at 11 years old, I get diagnosed with ADHD. It was actually 11, sorry, not 12. And I wasn't medicated, thank God. I was never really medicated. My parents gave me some like natural supplements that were called like Calm Child or something, and I ended up crying over my math homework. So they were like, okay, we're not going to do that. So I'm very grateful that I wasn't on Adderall or any crazy stimulant like that, because the brain damage that I could have sustained from that would have been far greater than that of antihistamines, which I am currently on. So so that actually is a good segue to talking about what is the war on drugs and drugs in general. So at 15 years old, I slowly started to be educated on what real history was like. So when it came to the feminist movement, sexual liberation, and the war on drugs from the 1960s, from Richard Nixon and all of those times, those were things that were not really talked about even in our history classes, even in American history, even in world history. And I think there's a reason why they don't want people to be very aware of how bad the war on drugs is. And the reason why is because minorities end up becoming the scapegoats in society, especially to these white privileged communities like Collegedale, Tennessee. They just look at the west side of Chattanooga, they look at Dobbs Avenue, they look at Alton Park, and they're like, this is what a lack of God brings you. And I'm like, slowly you start to notice things like, okay, first of all, it's poverty. Poverty is the problem. And you really didn't start getting that into your brain until after the pandemic. So people slowly started to wake up, and now we have the famous word woke. So when I was around 15, 16 years old, I was educated on the war on drugs. In 2015, Donald Trump was running for office. And I was one of the most outspoken people against Donald Trump in my entire school. Luckily, our history teacher was an outspoken Democrat as well. And I remember, because of how the New Year's was, or how the years was going to be laid out for 2016, I would be, if I didn't take this class ahead of time, I'd be taking U.S. history during 2016, and I actually wanted to take government class during 2016. So we would literally be doing political debates. We did a political spectrum test, and I was one of the most liberal people within the school. And it's very interesting to think that. And, slowly during that time, what else started happening? And that's where I discovered that I may also like dudes. And then became the whole, I'm a gamer who is in the closet. I'm a gamer. I kind of makes me seem a little straight to the naive people, at least in that Seventh-day Adventist circle. But I'm also in band. I'm a band kid. I'm a nerd. Something could have been detected here or there, but nobody really questioned it. Nobody really thought about it that much. I was very inconsistent with the friends that I had because I was neurodivergent and I didn't even know. This is another point that nobody would ever tell you, even in those Christian circles, is that you having ADHD also makes you neurodivergent. I thought neurodivergent literally just meant part of the autism community. This is something that I feel like people don't really talk about in those circles. And so let's go back to the whole school, anti-Donald Trump, my sexuality. All of these little things are slowly starting to bubble over. And then one of the youth pastors that we had was openly saying to the students, question everything. Question authority, question God, question the Bible. And I took that advice to heart. I really did. And I'm very glad I did in retrospect, because that is what led me to start to really unravel what is, the state of the world, and especially how open it is in this day and age to know what the state of the world is and how you can easily be on the right or the wrong side of history. So let's fast forward a few years later. I graduate high school, and then I end up going to Lee University in Cleveland, Tennessee. My first exposure to Pentecostal Christianity. And there is where I started to experience more homophobia, more anti-drug behavior, and a lot of just far-right people that were in the school. Now, I wouldn't say that I was really into a far-right pipeline, but what I can say is that my sense of humor made racist conservatives laugh. I know that I go all over the place when it comes to my humor and all that, and I can sometimes sound a little racist, but that's just the Venezuelan in me. We love our racist humor. It's kind of a thing. Don't worry, it's not as bad as you think. Here I am just demonizing myself. Oh well. So So I graduate high school and then I start going to a Pentecostal university. And during this time, I still end up attending Adventist church. And interestingly, I ended up switching from one church that was in the country to a Korean church that was more liturgical. I mean, it was still liturgical, but like the people there were at least slightly more liberal. Like I guess a Korean is more liberal than a Trump supporter. I would assume so. So and I also really liked the Korean food. They had potlucks every week, and the food was bomb. I got to eat kimchi every single week, and I felt great. You know, they have the great chili paste, lettuce wraps, bibimbap. Oh my god. Okay. Oh, and japchae. We love japchae. So, and tteokbokki. Okay, so really off topic. We love ADHD for that. So, when I was, around the age of 19, a lot of things started happening. I started to slowly notice the financial manipulation in my family. My family was like, well, if you do this, if you get good grades, we'll pay for this, yada, 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 yada. And for a while, I was, I guess you could say, spoiled by that. And during that time, I also didn't really see much of a purpose in life. I went into studying music education thinking I'd come out a music teacher. Now, in retrospect, yes, I do teach people music, but I'm not a professional. I don't have a degree. But also, at what other point could I just go back and study, especially in a horrible time like this? You really think I'm going back to America right now? So I end up starting to question everything, even when it comes to my sexuality. It started to really bubble up, and my mental health was not doing great. The stress of the homework was not helping me at all. I also discovered drugs for the first time when I was 19, and I discovered one thing that I said when I first got high, and I said, there is no reason that it should be illegal for me to feel like this. And that pretty much solidified all of the studying of the war on drugs that I did my research on when I was younger. I was a responsible enough kid to not do drugs in high school, surprisingly. Yeah. So there was a little bit of a drug incident, not a huge one. It was an edible incident when we went traveling my final year at Lee University, final semester. And there was actually a point that I told one of the directors that got me in trouble for that. And I was like, I don't really believe in God anymore. And he tried to really ram down being like the whole, Christian, it's a sin, it's a problem. And I'm like, I straight up told him, I'm like, bro, I'm not straight. I like drugs. I lean left. I've been against Donald Trump. I've been against any conservative point of view, especially when it came to politics. And he kind of shut up in his stance of just, whoa. He didn't expect me to just say that, because back when I was 19, I had shorter hair. I looked a little bit more whitewashed, if you would say. I mean, I'm still relatively, yeah, whatever. Venezuela is very multiracial, so at least I feel different wherever I go. Anyway, so after that, I basically became an agnostic. I mean, there was a point that I came out to my parents, and that was terrible. My life slowly started getting worse and worse, and I never even collected a stimulus check during the pandemic. If you know how much people needed that kind of money, I needed that kind of money to fix my car, and then life just started going downhill very fast in 2020 and 2021. And in 2021, I ended up hotel hopping with an ex, and things were just not going great. And because of that led me to leave the country. And when I got to Venezuela, living with my parents, I was still very traumatized by what was happening. And my parents were still doing the whole, anti-drug. They were thinking that I came here to get sober. And that is very much not the case. I was not going to just clean my life up just so I could get approval from my parents. I was not on that board at all. I was very much on the board of, I am, I'm going to be this open-minded ADHD bisexual kid, just doing my thing. And so after a bunch of incidents, after a bunch of me discovering my life, like how I actually am neurodivergent, and I very much align. Like, why are a lot of my friends autistic? Like, even my friends were getting diagnosed too, like my close friends. And so we're going to turn things around to when I started therapy. And I started therapy last year. And I'd say it's been one of the best things that has happened to me. Actually, no, last year? No, this year. And I mean, I went to therapy, but I went to a psychiatrist, and I was like, this is not for me. I'm not crazy. You don't need to sell me pills. I'm fine. I'm doing great. And so I went to a psychologist. And finally, I met, a psychologist that is not religious, that understood that drug use is not what it looks like. I have this joke where I say that I'm neurodivergent, so I medicate with drugs, and neurotypical people drug themselves with what is called medicine. So there's this whole point of there's drug condemnation in the church. There's the condemning of open sexuality and sexual liberation. And funny enough, I never actually went to a Unitarian Universalist church. I know. I should have gone. I kind of regret not going. But there's none where I live. So I start therapy, and she starts laying out the characteristics of autism and ADHD, and I'm like, okay, well, I've got a few things that I identify with the autism spectrum. Yes, a very, very light, but for the most part, I have pretty much every single characteristic that when it comes to ADHD. But she also talked about how gut health is very important, how many of us are lactose intolerant. Some people have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, if that's how you say it. I think Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, probably. So there's a lot of things that are slowly lining up. So now we fast forward to how the geopolitical space is doing in 2025. How basically we're repeating World War II, we're practicing eugenics, we're committing genocide, we're oppressing people that are disabled, that are racial minorities, that are not of this Anglo-Saxon origin, and we're kicking people out of their own homeland. There really is no justification for any of this suffering. And I'm going to say this again. There is no justification for suffering at all. We have learned that poverty is not deserved for any single person. Nobody deserves to be this poor. Nobody deserves to be homeless. Nobody deserves to lack food. Nobody deserves to lack the needs of their life. A shelter, food, drugs, care for their children, a car, transportation, public transportation. We realize what the point is in this world and how we're supposed to live life. And I feel like because everything is now laid out for us, thanks to our phones, thanks to society, thanks to how we are aligned with this woke agenda that they're clearly trying to squash, and we can see how we can fix the world, how we can prevent it from ending. And now you want to talk about how Seventh-day Adventists keep preaching the end of the world. Well, the billionaires are literally trying to cause the end of the world. And it's not even some supernatural entity possessing these people to do all these horrible things. So we know what causes people to do evil. It's greed. We know what causes people to question societal norms. It's neurodivergence. We know what helps us to get in contact with our subconscious mind. It's music and drugs. We know that we don't need any of these hierarchical structures and authority figures that just say what we need to do or try to guide us in our lives, but none of this is helping. None of this is making us truly happy. I work out of passion, but I'm also broke as shit. So, we know how the world is. We're very self-aware. Even people that live in dictatorships, we know what is going on in the world. So, after basically every single question, every single problem that there is in society has an answer, we know everything. We feel so awake in this world, but it feels so blissful, to just disassociate from how horrible things are. I'm out of words at this point, but I just want to say here that in general, there is there's this sentiment growing of the world needs to change. And I don't want to get too political because of, well, I'm a comedian. So, but I just want people to know that their suffering is not justified. How religions use hindsight bias to justify the horrible things that happen in our lives. And that is what becomes a testimony. So, another thing that I want to add on to this is that what kind of people have helped me deconstruct? So, there is the biggest figure right now, both on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, Britt Hartley from No Nonsense Spirituality. She has possibly one of the most inclusive studies when it comes to anthropology, religion, psychology, tying all of those things together. And I personally believe that people, like children from a young age, should slowly start taking things like psychology classes to have this kind of self-awareness. So there's so much to say when it comes to Britt Hartley. I'm not going to get into her, but she's amazing. If you don't know who she is, just go look up No Nonsense Spirituality on any social media platform. She will be there, and you will understand how the world sees, I guess, Christianity from even an outside perspective, and how you are more than welcome to question your own beliefs. And I have slowly been getting the answers I need, both, let's just say, from the occult side, from the tarot community, the witchy community, that we like to be very inclusive, and we enjoy practicing basic feminist needs like right to abortion and sexual liberation and open sex education, not abstinence only. So, all right, there's that. Another person that helped me when I was even a teenager was Lacey Green. Now, she's from the 2010s. We have a lot more like not sex therapists, sex educators. And I'm sure sex therapists are pretty good for anybody deconstructing as well. But I just personally don't know any off the top of my head. So Lacey Green helped me with that. I watch a lot of the atheist community right now. Dark Matter, Alex O'Connor, Drew from Genetically Modified Skeptic, the Antibot, his partner. So, and Dan McClellan. When it comes to interpreting scripture, Dan McClellan is pretty much the only person that is actually getting into the theology of it all. So, these are the people that have helped me, at least with my journey. They're more than readily available on YouTube. And to people that watch content overseas, please use your YouTube captions feature to translate a lot of these YouTubers, like all of their content. You will learn so much from them. I don't know if your country or your language, is there somebody that does the same content for you? I feel like there's a lot less of these people, even in places like, I'd say, Latin America or Africa, who's been heavily colonized by Christianity. So, all I can say is for people to just to find a purpose in life, to be happy with life, I would say go into the arts. Learn an instrument. Learn how to draw. Have something that'll make your mind, it'll be fulfilled, and it'll be kept open to new opportunities. And there, your stubbornness won't kill you. So, I'm going to finish off with one last statement that I wrote. It's not exactly like something of poetry or anything, but it's something that I feel like a lot of people, especially within the evangelical community, can identify with. So this is kind of like my religious thesis statement when it came to how my life turned out. So here we go. I was born into a world where I was told following in my family's footsteps was the most ideal. To follow a narrow, difficult path meant success in the future. Over the years, I would see days go by in which my life get increasingly tougher. The Bible only discouraged me from asking existential questions. During my teenage years, I naturally headed towards the humanistic curiosities of drugs and sex. I was educated by Lacey Green and not by abstinence only. I finally found the path I created to lead me into the comfort I was seeking in the arms of LGBTQ acceptance. I educated myself on the topic of the war on drugs and realized that many people in prison shouldn't be there in the first place. Later on at 19, I was starting to see the cracks in not only Seventh-day Adventism, but also in Christianity in general. The blatant hypocrisy that I witnessed and later fell victim to within my own family was enough to push me out of that community with a force that I never felt before. Initially, the ostracizing hit me hard, especially during the time that I was homeless. I cried to the universe as my agnostic self just to see if anyone would help me. Moving back in with my parents, I noticed that their main intention was to convert me, to turn me into someone I was not. I continued to deconstruct despite the fact that 92% of the population around me still believes in a God. Despite of colonization and capitalism, I began to study indigenous cultures predating Christianity. I learned that drug use was not only condemned by colonizing Christians as they entered the Western world. By learning the philosophy behind certain people's beliefs, I am now able to grasp at someone's moral compass with more accuracy. I'm able to understand the motive for their beliefs, and therefore am now able to form my own beliefs out of my own motivation. I studied the true nature of psychedelics and their healing powers. I'm now able... I'm now able to grasp the concept of nature as being one of its own and not of that some powerful creator. I realize that the problems with society are those that gaslight us into thinking we are the problematic ones for breaking the rules. I realize there is absolutely nothing inherently wrong with me. I realize that the only crime that should exist is abuse of power. I realize that neurodivergent people are naturally obsessed with breaking the laws of physics, time, and gravity, practically everything that pastors and religious tell us exactly not to do. I realized that music was telling history correctly and learned it through the eyes of artists and not the warriors and conquerors. Despite nihilism being a good way out of religion, it did not provide me with the will to live, so I found it elsewhere by forming my own atheistic spiritual beliefs. We are all God, so let's treat each other in the way Jesus Christ would have treated us. And this is my final quote with this is, "For we humans are all creators that evolve for the purpose of progress." So I hope that goes to show at least how my story can maybe resonate with somebody else. And I might be making a version of this in Spanish to reach out to the Latin American community and see who else can resonate with this. Because I feel like the world is slowly globalizing itself. We are all, I guess, learning English. We are all trying to communicate across other cultures and see our differences, know the roots of languages, where words even come from. I also listen to Etymology Nerd occasionally. People like that are the people that are pretty much holding up society right now, especially in a time where schools are failing. So this is going to be, I guess this is where I want to end my rant on everything that has to do with my deconstruction journey. And I'm going to do a video specifically about the Seventh-day Adventist Church and why I deconstructed from that. But it might be a shorter video, more specific video. And I also want to keep releasing more stand-up material. So you guys should definitely subscribe. Stay in touch with your friends. Stay in touch with me to see what's going on in my life, because everybody's life can be crazy right now. What else? Fuck ICE and free Palestine.